Episode 36, Moe Berg.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Wouldn't it be great if you could get a PhD in life through baseball? Welcome to Baseball PhD, a tour company for your brain. 30 major league teams, 100 places to see. Let's touch them all as we make the road trip of a lifetime. It's a beautiful day for baseball.
Hi, I am Ed Casputis.
I'm Farley Dillinger.
And I'm Mark Rantala.
Welcome to Baseball PhD. This podcast is featuring the man who inspired the creation of Baseball PhD, Moe Berg.
Today's podcast will be broken into 5 segments. Prologue, Act 1, the Princeton years. Act 2, the Major League years. Act 3, the OSS years. And the conclusion.
We've added several posts and videos about Moe Berg and the elements of this podcast. No matter when you hear this podcast, you can go to our website, www.baseballphd.net, and enter Moe Berg into the search box located in the upper right-hand corner of our website's header. All posts will have Moe Berg as a keyword.
Well, let's start at the beginning. Ed, how did you first learn about Moe Berg?
Farley and Mark, I'm sitting at Citi Field watching the first Sunday game ever with my family and with David Drubin, a good friend of mine from Philadelphia. It's about the 6th inning. David starts to tell me the story about Moe Berg. I said, this is crazy. I can't believe it's true. He goes, I'll send you the book. 2 days later, he FedExes me the book. I start to read the book, The Catcher Was a Spy by Nicholas Davidoff. I got halfway through the book and I said, this is incredible. I got the idea to start Baseball PhD. If Moe Berg can travel the world and get a PhD in life through baseball, sign me up. I want to do it and I want to help other people.
Moe Berg was born on March 2nd, 1902, in New York City as a 12-pound baby. Moe was the youngest of 3 children. His older brother Sam was born in 1898. His older sister Ethel was born in 1900.
Moe's father, Bernard, had immigrated from the tiny Ukrainian village of Kapynia in 1894. Kapynia was a Jewish village. In the Ukraine, Bernard had been an accountant. He first came to the United States, didn't like it, and went to England because the British had an offer to make anyone a citizen if they joined their military to fight in the Boer War. Bernard got to England 4 days after they ended the offer. He then returned to the United States. Ralph Berger, baseball biographer.
Bernard Berg, who was his father, and Ruth Tasker, who was his mother, they were both from Russia, from the Ukraine. Mr. Berg, Bernard Berg, came to the United States, and he worked in the laundry. And when he earned enough money, he sent for his wife, Ruth. Then the children were born, Dr. Sam, who became a medical doctor, Ethel, who became a school teacher, and Moe, who became a lawyer, which he never practiced, and a known baseball player. Later on, a spy for the OSS.
Although the Bergs were Jewish, they were secular Jews.
They moved to Newark, New Jersey, and they moved. Mr. Berg had become a pharmacist. Bernard Berg, his father, and they moved to the Roseville section of Newark, New Jersey, which was mainly a Gentile neighborhood. And they being Jewish, they were kind of on the fringe of society there.
In fact, one of the reasons that the Berg family moved from New York City to Newark was that Newark did not have much of a Jewish population.
They didn't mingle well with the population that they were living in and about with, and neither did they integrate well with their own extended family. They would stand apart when there were gatherings of the extended family. I don't know if they were looking down on the rest of the people, the rest of their family, extended family members, because they were very intelligent and became well educated, or they were just aloof people.
Bernard ran a neighborhood pharmacy with the family living above the pharmacy. Around 1915, Newark was thriving.
Newark had a population of 350,000. It was called the workshop of the nation. Between 1870 and 1910, 250,000 immigrants had settled in Newark. Newark had 2,200 factories, 11 miles of industrial wharfs, and 14 freight yards.
Bernard never saw his son play baseball, ever.
He vehemently was against Moe playing sports. He felt they were a distraction and a waste of time. And he never attended a baseball game, let alone Moe's even appearing in one. But his mother exulted in her son becoming famous as a baseball player, and she really enjoyed his athletic activities.
Berg's mother, Rose, came from a nearby town in the Ukraine along the Bug River, not far from Romania. Rose was beautiful, mellow, and patient. When Bernard first left the Ukraine in 1894, it was 2 years later that he returned to the Ukraine to bring Rose to New York City.
At the age of 3.5, Moe begged his mother to send him to school. Moe won, and his academic career began. It was later discovered that Moe Berg had a photographic memory. The Bergs were living in the Roseville section of Newark in 1906. Roseville had good schools, middle-class residents, and very few Jews.
Moe Berg generally made it his policy to distance himself from religion. As a youth, he played under the name of Runt Wolf and joined the Roseville Methodist Episcopal Church baseball team.
Moe had an early interest in the Hebrew language. One day he asked his father, Bernard, to teach him Hebrew. Bernard told his son to go see the rabbi. Moe reported back that the rabbi wanted to teach him religion. I want to learn Hebrew. Bernard then taught his son Hebrew.
Berg graduated from Beringer High School at the age of 16 in 1918. Moe was 6 feet 1 inch and a slow runner. In his yearbook, the following caption was under Moe's picture. There is a boy who is a star. Now this might seem quite queer. Though Morris Berg is smart, you know, it's not known when he's near. The personality of a spy was starting to evolve.
It's almost strange, but he was almost meant to be a spy to some degree, because he kept away. He would appear and disappear suddenly. His whole makeup seemed to be towards keeping himself, unidentifiable.
After high school, Moe started college at New York University. Moe was still 16. He spent 2 semesters there playing basketball and baseball. World War I had ended during Moe's first semester.
Moe then applied to Princeton University. He was accepted and started as a member of the freshman class in September 1919. Louis Jacobson, staff writer for PolitiFact, Princeton class of 1992.
It's where the children of the powerful went, the rich and powerful. People who had gone to prep school in New England or the Middle Atlantic states. It has a reputation of being kind of a country club school. I think that's probably a bit overblown, but it's certainly a lot less true today than it was. But I think it probably fairly describes it back then. For folks who had grown up in the lower middle class, like Berg had, it was a very tough road to get there. Very few slots given out to people who weren't of the right pedigree.
1 month later, Major League Baseball would experience the 1919 World Series and the Black Sox scandal as Moe settled in at Princeton.
Chuck Brodsky, singer and songwriter.
I remember my father passing along a book about Moe Berg on to me, and funny enough, I had been told by family members that Moe Berg was somebody that one of my great uncles knew, and I didn't find out until many years later just how.
After the break, Act 1, The Princeton Years. But first, let's listen to a portion of Moe Berg the Song by Chuck Brodsky.
Moe Berg, the catcher, good field and no hit. Somehow he lasted 19 years till his knees made him quit. Never really played much, never really cared. Happy just to hang around with a uniform to wear.
Baseball PhD can produce custom audio marketing for your product or service. The audio files are yours to use in any way you wish. There are many ways you can use this innovative marketing technique. Complement your email newsletters with audio comments. Include custom audio when you ship to customers and distributors. Educate those selling your products on your story and what makes it special. We'll do the production. Give us a call at 800-920-7674 or email us at ideas@baseballphd.net. Let's think outside the box together. Act 1. The Princeton Years.
The Princeton freshman class of 1923 were the children of wealthy Christians. Moe, being a Jew from Newark, New Jersey, made himself stand out.
Ralph Berger.
I do know that he was on the fringe there. Most of the students there were Protestant, very wealthy, and Moe, although his father probably made a good living, was not really among the wealthy students there. He was on the fringe, and in some ways, I think he may have preferred it that way anyway.
Princeton was a small village during the Berg years and was affectionately known as the University in the Jungle. The isolation, coupled with the fact that women would not attend until 1968, made the social institutions even more important.
Louis Jacobson.
There were certainly a lot of differences, but there were also some similarities. I mean, it was much more diverse. That's probably the biggest difference. It became co-ed in the late 60s, so it was a single-sex school until then. And at the time when Berg was there, it was very much a sort of bastion of wealthy Christian kids, not the kind of place where somebody like Berg, who had more humble sort of origin, were common. And certainly being Jewish, he was one of only a few Jewish students in the class. So somebody who really faced a bit of a social barrier. He was not. He actually, I think, did get one offer into an eating club, which is the main kind of center of social life, and they're selective. But he generally stayed away from that. It's probably through some combination of his own reserve and just not feeling comfortable in that kind of environment.
Later in life, Berg referred to his Princeton classmates as all those conservative so-and-sos.
Even today, but certainly back then, it was much more isolated. It's not in a major city. It's what amounts to a small town. It's not a whole lot to do. Certainly, the sort of eating, drinking, socializing life of the university certainly was centered at the eating clubs, and to a certain extent today, it still is as well.
Berg played basketball during his first 3 years at Princeton.
Berg played first base during his freshman year. That year's team went undefeated. His sophomore year, Berg became the varsity shortstop, starting every game there for his last 3 years at Princeton.
Berg hit .235 his sophomore year, .230 his junior year, and .337 his senior year.
During Berg's senior year at Princeton, the Tigers won 18 consecutive games. Princeton's second baseman was Crossan Cooper, who said about Berg,
he had very few intimate friends. There weren't many Jewish people at Princeton. As a group, they were kind of looked down upon.
As a Jewish kid growing up in Washington and a big baseball fan, he was an obvious person to focus on. I mean, he's somebody who has had just a fascinating career, not just as a baseball player, but also as a linguist and a spy. Really, it was hard not to think of him as the most fascinating of the players of his era.
When an opposing runner was on second, Berg would communicate with Cooper in Latin.
One of my favorite anecdotes is apparently he and his teammate used a sort of code in Latin to talk to each other on the field so that the opposing players wouldn't know what their signs and plans were.
Berg's Princeton coach was Bill Clark, a former big leaguer with the Baltimore Orioles of the 1890s. Clark once told Berg that he ran so slow that
he'd get to first base just as fast wearing snowshoes.
While Berg was slow in the field, he had a strong, accurate throwing arm with great baseball instincts. Berg sensed the path of the ball before it was hit.
Berg's happiest moments at Princeton were on the baseball field. To Berg, baseball was the great leveler. A green field in the spring where men of every height, breadth, shade, and creed were joined in harmonious competition. Skill and nothing else made you special.
I think it was important to Berg not just to be smart, though. He certainly could have had any number of different careers as a very smart person, but he really spent a very long time in baseball, and so on some level, I think he really felt like he needed to excel in both fields in terms of brains and brawn to sort of reach his full potential.
Berg found that baseball helped him to counteract the feeling of inferiority and shyness he had felt on being treated as a Jew at Princeton.
I think his personality was very much as a private person. He didn't share too much of his inner thinking to people, and I think baseball really allowed him to do that.
Religious discrimination at the college was so strong that one of Berg's Jewish classmates pretended to be a Christian.
Princeton made Berg aware that he was branded with the mark of faith he had been raised to resist, yet Berg made no attempt to hide his Jewishness.
Berg was asked to join a Princeton eating club with the caveat that Berg not ask any of his Jewish friends to join. Berg declined.
On June 19, 1923, Berg graduated with a B.A. degree magna cum laude in modern languages.
And to be fair, he also was a very studious student as well. He took 7 different languages at Princeton: Latin, Greek, French, Spanish, Italian, German, and Sanskrit.
On graduation day, Berg posed for a picture at the Princeton sundial. Berg was handsome, but looked glum.
Berg had suffered rejection at Princeton. He was never voted captain of the baseball team, and he had not been offered membership in Phi Beta Kappa.
In his senior yearbook, Berg received 2 votes for most brilliant student. The winning student received 37 votes, and Berg did not receive a single vote in any of the other 41 categories.
I believe that in the senior poll, Berg was barely even mentioned at all. It's not that he was unpopular necessarily, but he was not really well known. He didn't open up very much, a pattern that certainly continued later in his life as well, and was a very good sort of personality trait to have as a spy. But he didn't really have too many, if any, close friends, and he was a bit of a mystery. And really, in some ways, his experience on campus mirrored that of what came through in the future.
Princeton's modern language department offered Berg a teaching position, but he declined. Berg's favorite language was French. He badly wanted to see Paris, Versailles, and Provence. Berg just didn't have any money to cross the Atlantic.
Linda McCarthy, former curator of the CIA Museum.
He wanted to play baseball. When he was just out of Princeton, he got an offer to teach, I think, Romance languages there. Most people with that particular ilk in life would have jumped at the opportunity. He says, no, I'm going to see if I can get myself a professional baseball contract. And he did for $5,000, which enabled him, as you say, to do the springtime to fall-time baseball thing and then have the off-season to go to the Sorbonne in France.
Fortunately for Berg, a high-paying summer job was waiting for him.
After the break, Act 2, the Major League Years. But first, let's listen to another portion of Moe Berg, the song by Chuck Brodsky.
Moe Berg, Princeton graduate, went on to study law. Got his degree from Columbia, all the while playing ball. He caught the eye of the Dodgers. They were trying to sign a Jew who might help him sell some tickets in the Bronx and Yonkers, too.
Don't forget about Baseball PhD in winter. We've got great podcasts for you. Every 2 weeks, starting on November 26th, we'll have a podcast focusing on one of the all-time greatest baseball play-by-play sportscasters, including Vin Scully, Ernie Harwell, Mel Allen, Red Barber, Jack Buck, and Harry Carey. The season never ends on Baseball PhD.
Act 2, the Major League Years.
In 1923, both New York National League teams were coached by former teammates of Princeton's baseball manager Bill Clark. John McGraw was coaching the New York Giants, and Wilbert Robinson was managing the Brooklyn Robins. The Robins would soon become the Dodgers.
Both managers knew about Berg. They liked how he played, and both reasoned that Berg's Jewish heritage would help sell tickets, since New York had a huge Jewish population.
McGraw's nickname was Little Napoleon. McGraw was a domineering and abrasive man. He also had 2 future Hall of Famers at shortstop, Dave Bancroft and Travis Jackson.
Wilbert Robinson was the opposite of McGraw. Jolly and friendly, Robinson's nickname was Uncle Robbie, and besides, the Robins were thin at shortstop.
Berg was torn, and he didn't want to disappoint his father, who was pressuring him to go to law school. Berg met with Dutch Carter, a former Yale pitcher who had spurned the big leagues for law school.
Take the baseball career, Carter advised. The law can wait. When I was your age, I had a chance to pitch in the National League, but my family looked down on professional sports and vehemently opposed my accepting. I've always been sorry I listened to them because it's made me a frustrated man. Don't you become frustrated. At least give it a try.
Berg took Carter's advice and picked the Robins since he thought he could play more and sooner with the Robins.
On June 27, 1923, Berg signed with the Robins for $5,000. Great pay for 3 months' work. Now Berg had the money to go to France in the offseason.
Berg didn't start at shortstop until August. His mother, Rose, loved to attend games in Brooklyn. His father, Bernard, would not.
Berg finished his rookie year with a .186 batting average and 22 errors. It was time for Berg to get out of town and head to Paris.
Berg went to Paris and signed up for 22 credit hours at the Sorbonne for $1.95. Berg liked French culture. By accident, Berg ran into Giants manager John McGraw, who was amazed to see a 21-year-old shortstop in Paris.
It was in Paris that Berg acquired the habit of reading multiple newspapers each day.
Linda McCarthy, former curator of the CIA Museum.
To Moe, the written word was something to be revered, and sure enough, he said, if you read major newspapers, that is the education you need to get through life. And he lived true to this word. Every time he went out, he came home with an armful of papers, some of them in foreign languages.
Berg finished his trip by touring Italy and Switzerland.
For the 1924 season, Berg was demoted to the Minneapolis Millers. He also played for the Toledo Mudhens.
Berg missed the first 2 months of the 1926 season to finish his first year of law school at Columbia. Berg played for the Chicago White Sox in 1926. He hit .221 in 41 games.
The White Sox Jewish fans were very proud of Berg. Earlier in the season, White Sox fans had a day for pitcher Red Faber. Faber was in his 15th Major League season with the White Sox. The crowd took up a collection and presented Faber with $792.
Chicago fans raised $25,000 for Berg on his day, but Berg turned it down by saying,
"I've done nothing to merit it, and besides, it would be an affront to a great player like Faber."
On August 5th, 1928, serendipity happened to Berg.
Ralph Berger, baseball biographer.
Chicago White Sox, and Ray Short was the manager. and all three catchers were injured during the game. And he looked up and down the bench and said, in a panic, he says, "Who can catch here?" And Moe Berg said, "I think I can." He said, "Well, who said you couldn't?" Shulk said to him. He said, "My high school coach." So he said, "I'll be obliged if you put on the catcher's paraphernalia and prove your high school coach wrong and get out there and catch." And he did. And then he was wedded to the tools of ignorance from that point on.
Berg hit .246 that year in 76 games. In 1929, Berg hit .287 in what would be his most games in any season, 107.
As a baseball player, he was a very, very good catcher. He understood the his pitchers, what their strengths were and weaknesses were, and he knew the batters, and he had a rifle arm, because he started out as a shortstop and a third baseman.
On April 6, 1930, the White Sox were working their way to Chicago to start the season. In a spring training game in Arkansas, Berg's spikes caught in the dirt, and he hurt his knee. The next morning, Berg was bound for Mercy Hospital in Chicago to learn that he had a sheared knee ligament.
On May 2nd, 1930, a puzzling notice appeared in the Chicago Tribune.
If anybody in Chicago knows how Moe Berg, the first-string catcher now laid up in Chicago, is getting along, will they please communicate with the ball club?
Moe Berg had vanished.
In mid-May, Berg appeared in the White Sox clubhouse and claimed to be ready for action. He was in the starting lineup by May 23rd, but his knee injury made catching every day to be impossible.
Berg played in only 20 games in 1930 and batted .115.
He was never much of a hitter. He only hit 7 home runs in his entire major league career, batted about .243, but he was smart. He had the brains, and he knew the hitters and the pitchers.
In October 1930, Berg headed to Manhattan and started working as a corporate attorney on Wall Street.
Berg had 8 identical dark gray suits. He always wore a white dress shirt, black tie, and black shoes. Sometimes he wore a gray fedora. When asked why he always had the same look, Berg said,
"He was mourning for the world."
It was at this time that Berg started to crave newsprint. He would read 10 newspapers a day. Until Berg finished reading a paper, it was alive and nobody could touch it. When he'd finished, he would throw it on the floor and the paper was dead and no longer sacrosanct.
Berg once told a Chicago sports writer,
"If you read the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Boston Globe, you didn't need to go to college."
Chuck Brodsky, singer and songwriter.
Probably just the fact that he was such an intellectual and was so far outside the box. Was a bit of a loner, probably because there weren't very many other ball players that shared his interests, and so he pursued his interests on his own during the daytime. I suppose ball players then had a lot more time during the day to wander around cities, and he would pop into bookstores and was such a voracious reader.
Why did Berg like baseball so much? He knew of no other job that would allow him to travel so many interesting places with a meal allowance and offer him as much free time for reading, dining, and adventure. The rhythm of the game fit his personality.
For Berg, life really began once the day's game was over and he could slip away from the ballpark in a cab to explore.
Yeah, I could see baseball really affording him opportunities that way. He was just such a fascinating person, not limited to just being a baseball player. He was such a huge person, and so he had so many interests, and he had time on the road to pursue some of them.
Berg had become a scholar in a room full of muscle, yet surprisingly, he never learned how to drive.
In April 1931, the White Sox put Berg on waivers, and the Cleveland Indians claimed him.
Berg came down with bronchial pneumonia. He played in only 14 games with 1 hit for Cleveland and hit .077, which would be his worst major league season for his career.
He never caused anybody any trouble, said pitcher Willis Hudlin. You never really knew he was around.
Berg's greatest accomplishment during 1931 was that he took Mallory Bradley, the youngest son of the team owner Alva Bradley, to Cleveland's museums on rainy days.
The Indians gave Berg his unconditional release in January 1932. The Great Depression was raging, but Berg wasn't concerned.
On March 10, 1932, Berg was invited to spring training with the Washington Senators,
a team that had government officials and diplomats as fans.
Before each game in Washington, Berg shared stories with sports journalists. All his life, Berg made a point of befriending sports writers.
Red Sox player Rick Farrell said,
Moe had connections with the top people, the owners, the writers, the managers. He associated with them more than he did with his teammates. I never saw him with other players.
Berg collected experiences as he studied and traveled the world. He made 2 trips to Japan with other Major League ball players in 1932 and 1934.
It was American missionary Horace Wilson who introduced baseball to Japan in 1872. The Japanese thought baseball was an American martial art.
In 1932, Berg toured Japan for the first time as a catching instructor. He also explored Hawaii on the way.
One thing about baseball, and particularly the position he ended up playing, which as we know now was catcher, that's the quarterback of the baseball diamond. You have to have almost a peripheral vision to see what's going on and know intuitively and intellectually how every game is going to be played by every player at any given circumstance. If you think about it, that's pretty much the intel biz. You have to have a frame of vision that you can encompass all these different things that are going on at one time, sift it down, and make the right play, make the right call. In that context, the game of baseball mirrors intelligence service and vice versa. In the case of Moe Berg, he had this tremendous intellect. I say he's like a chess meister who could sit there and look at the board and envision, based on who the opponent is, what the next move was going to be and what the next 20 moves were going to be. All this meshed together not only to make him a fairly decent baseball player and an excellent catcher, but a top-notch operative, because he did bring these talents to bear and he knew how to use them.
After Japan, Berg toured China, Vietnam, and Cambodia.
Berg thought that the ruins at Angkor Wat were the most thrilling sight in Asia. Berg then finished his tour by seeing India and the Middle East.
In 1933, Berg's Washington Senators won the American League pennant. Berg only played in 40 games and hit 185, but he did hit a career-high 2 home runs. Berg did not play in the 1933 World Series.
Washington baseball fans are in a tough spot right now. The Giants are leading 3-1 in the World Series, and the score's now 3-0 in their favor in the 5th game. But wait, Schulte, Washington center fielder, sends a tremendous drive into the left field stands with 2 men on base. It's a wow of a homer, chalking up 3 runs by Manush, Cronin, and Schulte, and tying the score in a double bow knot. Oh, boy, what a climax. What a ball game. But in the 10th inning, Mellott, who helped the Giants win the first game with a homer, drives a terrific liner just into the center field stand. It looks like a homer. The umpire stopped him at second. There's an argument. Schulte dove over the fence and knocked the ball down, but the Giants claim it should be allowed as a home run. How about it, Judge Landis? Look, the umpires reversed his decision. There goes Ott around a home plate. It means 4 runs for the Giants, and it wins the game and the World Series. They'll probably argue about that home run decision here in Washington all winter.
1934. Berg had a better year by playing in 62 games and hitting .251. After the season, Berg returned to Japan along with Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and other All-Stars.
When you're talking baseball and you're talking intelligence, everyone should read the article he wrote for the Atlantic Monthly on pitchers and catchers. You can get it in libraries. It might even be available online. I think it was in 1941, but don't quote me. It's Atlantic Monthly, called Pitchers and Catchers. It is a wonderful treatise on the game of baseball. It's also a wonderful treatise on just about every aspect of living as we know it. Once the thing became available, and I must say I kind of put it out there because I found it quite by accident, I got calls literally at the CIA from all across the nation. Tell me about this article. I said, Moe wrote it. I didn't. Yes, but where did you get it? The calls were coming from people psychiatrists, because they saw in the article, based on the way I'd explained it on an interview at one point, oh, I can use that in the science of psychology, or I can use that in the treatment of my patients who are schizophrenic. Everybody was drawing parallels to their own life space of this one article that Moe Berg wrote on pitchers and catchers. Now, in the context of intelligence business, if you read the article and have any knowledge of how espionage is crafted, and certainly any knowledge of the game of baseball, you see parallels there that just run throughout the article. And in fact, at one point, he talks about on the diamond using counterintelligence, which, as we know today, is a perfectly usable operative word in the world of intelligence, counterintelligence and intelligence. So the two married each other, they complemented each other, they ran parallel, and they intersected. But I would ask your listeners, get a hold of that article if you're truly interested in understanding Moe Berg, because it's in his own words. It's one of the few things he ever penned on his own and got published. And like I say, depending on who you are, you can make it relate to your own life space. It's a wonderful treatment of American literature, too. So that's what I would recommend in terms of contrasting and studying the business of baseball and intelligence.
During the tour on November 29, 1934, Berg missed the game.
Berg had read in the Japan Advisor that 22-year-old Elsie Lyon had given birth to her first child, a daughter named Alice. Elsie was the daughter of Joseph Grew, the United States ambassador to Japan.
Well, Mysterious Moe decided that maybe he wouldn't show at the ballpark that day. What he would do was take a camera that he had gotten, a nice Bell & Howell. It was a big thing. And he would take it to the top of this building, which at the time was, if it wasn't the tallest building in Tokyo, it was one of the tallest. And it certainly had an unobstructed view of a large part of the area, including the shipping lanes and all this that fed out of the city. Under the pretext of visiting the daughter of the ambassador who had just delivered a baby, he was going to go to this hospital, wish her Godspeed, and then sneak up to the very top of the hospital and take pictures. So what he did was put on one of his favorite, call it a uniform, a kimono, and underneath the kimono he had smuggled this camera. And I've had people say, well, how could he do that? I said, simple. He was a spy. In his own way of thinking, he knew how to pull this off. And I've seen people smuggle smaller things that were discovered, but in the case of this camera, he managed to pull it off. What he did was he had the kimono, he had, I think, even an arrangement of flowers wrapped up he was going to present to this young lady, got to one floor where the woman was, the maternity ward, dumped the flowers, and continued up to the top of the building. And that's when he pulled the camera out from underneath the kimono and started taking panoramic pictures of the Tokyo topography. And now they go back to this business of, did Jimmy Doolittle use it in the raid? Now, we all know about the Doolittle raid and how it brought America out of its funk after the misery of December 7th and Pearl Harbor. I can't say I was within 6 months of interviewing Jimmy Doolittle himself to ask him this question. Did you folks, when you were planning the raid, pull out Moe Berg's footage, the stuff he took at the top of St. Luke's, and did you use it to plan the raid on Tokyo? Sadly, I had just located him, was getting ready to make contact with him, and he died. I never got a chance to ask General Doolittle, first person, whose footage did you use, where did it come from? Now, even if the United States military and or government did not use the footage for that, the fact that they had it, the fact that Moe had it, I cannot believe in my heart of hearts that in learning of Moe Berg, that the government, if it knew that Moe had this footage, and he did, because he kept taking pictures the whole time he was out there, did not take advantage of it. When you're looking at stuff from an intelligence aspect, you look at everything, or you're supposed to. There's no parochial vision when you are an intelligence operative. You have to think 360, you have to look 360. If they knew this guy, who was a known quantity in the diplomatic circles, had all this tremendous footage that he had taken of the Tokyo harbor as things are going south between our two countries, it only stands to reason that they would have said, may we borrow your camera, please? I have a feeling, and it's just supposition based on little things I pick up along the way, that somehow, some way, the government was able to take advantage of that tremendous black and white footage. Whether or not General Doolittle used it or not, I don't know. As I say, I missed my opportunity to get a first-person account of that, so that's just one of those things lost to history. But the fact of the matter is, intuitively, he knew he was in an opportune time to take some nice footage of a very important industrial, commercial part of the country that was giving us all sorts of problems at that time. So he did. Came back down, took the camera, and on his way back, he didn't go back with the team. I think he took a train through different parts of Europe. He was taking footage then, too. So it's the idea he intuitively knew that this would be of value to someone somewhere along the line.
After his 1934 trip to Japan, Berg then traveled to Shanghai, the Philippines, Korea, and then he took the Trans-Siberian Railroad to Moscow.
These are the things that go into the greater understanding of Moe Berg in terms of his ability to intuitively know what is of interest. And that, again, when you're thinking in terms of the intel biz, you have to have a basic understanding of what someone might be interested in. The problem we have in today's field, there's so much information coming at us, whether you're talking satellites or certainly the information age. The real skill comes in being able to sift it down into something that's A, accurate, B, readable, and C, has value. Moe Berg could do that. In fact, when he was retired from baseball, retired from OSS, he was a contract employee for CIA. And I've had it told to me from folks who have read the reports he submitted that there's some of the best writing in terms of field reports that they've ever seen. And again, when I'm talking to new hires, I would say, if you want to know how to write a decent cable from the field, you need to study Moe Berg. And again, it was his natural composition and his ability to know, this is who I am and this is what I want to do.
While in Moscow, he peered through a hole and discovered that the Moscow subway was being dug by women using picks.
Out came the camera, and Berg started to record. Moments later, a Red Army soldier tapped Berg on the shoulder and took his passport.
Berg stood there for 5 hours in 20-degree below zero weather. 5 hours later, the soldier returned and gave Berg back his passport without a word.
Berg realized that his time was up in Russia, so he went to Poland.
Berg's 1934 trip to Japan was his last, but for those who met him, Berg constantly talked about Japan for the rest of his life.
In December 1934, the Senators traded their player-manager Joe Cronin to the Boston Red Sox. Berg followed his old manager to Boston, where he hit .286 in 38 games.
He didn't care if he played or not. He just wanted to be on the team.
Says Gene DeSaltos, who caught for the Red Sox from 1937 to 1940. Berg was making use of baseball to plot a life of wandering curiosity.
Berg took 3 baths a day, and he continued to read 10 newspapers a day. He didn't smoke and drank little. Many thought that Berg was the Benjamin Franklin of baseball.
In 1939, Berg batted 33 times in 14 games.
Gentlemen,
Berg would say when he was sent into the game,
does everyone still get 3 strikes out there? As World War II brewed in places that Berg had already been, Berg felt uneasy in his baseball uniform.
Europe is in flames, withering in a fire set by Hitler,
said Berg.
All over the continent, men and women and children are dying. Soon we too will be involved. And what am I doing? I'm sitting in the bullpen telling jokes to the relief pitchers.
It was time for Berg to figure out how to use his skills to help his country.
After the break, Act 3, the OSS years. But first, let's listen to another portion of Moe Berg, the song by Chuck Brodsky.
Moe Berg, the professor of the bullpen, joked with pitchers, reading them the newspapers he used to have delivered. Spoke to them in Russian, Japanese, and French. He was the greatest scholar that ever rode the bench.
Hi, we're
the Wise Guys, and you're listening to the smartest podcast in all of baseball. Welcome to Baseball PhD.
Never forget, our website is baseballphd.net.
Act 3, the OSS years.
A certain German chancellor has lost his head. He's going to get a headache somewhere else instead. And he will be retiring very soon to join a certain Kaiser down in Doon. Adolf, you fit no much more than you can chew.
On January 5th, 1942, Berg accepted an assignment from Nelson Rockefeller to work for the Office of Inter-American Affairs.
Berg's father, Bernard, passed away on January 14th, 1942. 7 days later, Berg was sworn in as a public servant.
Berg agreed to travel to South and Central American countries to monitor health and fitness at a daily salary of $22.22. While Berg's assignment at first was minor, he had already learned in Japan that a nervy man could still get a lot done, regardless of his title.
On August 22nd, 1942, Moe Berg boarded a plane for Miami and then flew to Panama.
Berg traveled through Panama, Costa Rica, Peru, Trinidad, Colombia, Aruba, Carico, Venezuela, and Brazil.
Berg was networking with other governmental agencies as he hoped to land another assignment that required real espionage.
Working for the government made Berg even more secretive.
In June 1943, Berg resigned from the OIAA. He had spoken with the OSS Colonel Ellery Huntington about working for the OSS. He knew that the hiring process would take some time, but Berg had time.
Berg was in love, and her name was Estella Hooney.
Estella Hooney had much in common with Berg.
Estella's father owned the New Haven School of Music. Estella was a pianist. She read as much as Berg and spoke Italian, German, and excellent French. French was Berg's best and favorite language.
They were two vivacious, intelligent people who loved to explore the world. From afar, another man was also in love with Estella, Berg's older brother, Dr. Sam.
Linda McCarthy, former curator of the CIA Museum.
Yes, he had relationships with women, but it was like so much else about Moe. They were fleeting. He didn't really give much of himself in terms of personality. In other words, you're not going to sit there and have a talk about Moe Berg. He just didn't do it. And it's awfully hard to form a deep relationship based on, I will say, superficial chatter, because the man was going on about the alignment of the stars that night. But that doesn't really make for an intimate relationship, not that he didn't enjoy the company of women. But when it comes to Moe the matinee idol, which is what I call him, he looks like one, but he didn't really behave like one.
The director of the Office of Strategic Services was William Wild Bill Donovan. Donovan liked unusual, talented people since he was one himself.
You have to understand OSS in the context of Donovan. One mirrored the other. In fact, the joke is that Donovan created OSS in his own image. And in many respects, he did. Donovan was a World War I hero from, got the Medal of Honor. In the case of the OSS, it was one of these things where the lessons of World War I came back to haunt him. We did not have an intelligence operation entity in World War I, and consequently we suffered for it. Just ask anybody who survived the gassings and then came home and died from the gassings. It was the idea they didn't know what they were doing on the battlefield over there. Donovan was one of those guys that was sucked up in the battlefield. He actually got the Medal of Honor for his World War I service. When he was recuperating in a hospital, he says, the world has changed. We're a global entity now. Having survived World War I, we are now a national and international power. We need an intelligence service. And by that, the idea was, know what the other guy was doing. And if that means spying on your friends to get the answer, yeah, that folds into it too. What Donovan did was go after World War I over to England and find out how the Brits did it, because they had an intelligence operation in place. So I thought, might as well learn from the best. What Donovan did was take the English model and mold it in his own swashbuckling image. What historians sometimes neglect to remember or recall when they're talking OSS It was only in operation for 2.5 years. But if you look at the entire umbrella of what that organization achieved in that time frame, it is monumental. And Moe Berg was a central cog in that wheel by virtue of the fact of the missions he was asked to complete at the behest of Donovan and the OSS. But when it comes to Donovan, yes, he was one of these guys with a magnetic personality, a natural-born leader who realized that America needed intelligence service, whatever you called it. Office of Strategic Services, later the CIA, but you cannot participate in the world blind. And that's what was going on before, actually, Pearl Harbor. And Donovan said, enough. We're going to create the OSS. I'm going to get literally the best and the brightest. That is exactly what he did.
During World War I, Donovan led New York's Fighting Irish 69th Regiment. His response to an order to retreat was to issue a command to charge. Donovan looked at his terrified troops and said,
"What's the matter with you? Do you want to live forever?"
His troops charged and lived another day.
Berg's OSS code name was Remus.
Of all the people I read about, both during my tenure at CIA and the History Department, and certainly since I've been out on my own, he's one of the few people that you can honestly say did the right thing for the right reasons at the right time. There are no ulterior motives such that we know today. He was a genuine figure, a complex figure, but very much a genuine figure that, quite frankly, captivated me from the word go. Now, when I was at the agency, I stumbled across his file, his declassified OSS file, and I started reading it. I thought, my goodness gracious, this man was a professional baseball player who went on during World War II to become this country's foremost atomic spy. How could we have missed this in all the preliminary schooling we get coming into the agency that introduces you to the world of espionage? Nobody ever mentioned Moe Berg. I found a couple of books on the guy, started reading it, and quite frankly, he became a bit of an obsession. But having said that, I used him as a tool to teach up-and-coming case officers, espionage agents, how to really conduct the business of espionage, because he did it so well. Until I put him in the exhibit center, I ran the CIA museum, until I did a display on the guy, people would go, "Who in the world are you talking about?" And I said, come down to the museum and I'll show you.
America's scientific community was worried that Werner Heisenberg was the German physicist who was most likely to help Germany develop an atomic bomb.
U.S. physicists were scared to death that the Germans would develop the atomic bomb first and win the war.
Colonel Leslie Groves was put in charge of the Manhattan Project to build the first atomic bomb for the U.S. Groves had impressed his superiors by overseeing the construction of the Pentagon on time and under budget.
On May 4th, 1944, Berg left Washington, D.C., then flew to Newfoundland, then to Scotland, and finally to London. Berg then went to Algiers.
He was one of these individuals, I say, was wired for the business, meaning he was intellectually, intuitively, naturally wired to be a spy. He loved the life. It was peripatetic. It was solitary. He could do his own thing. He loved geopolitical issues. He spoke several languages. I would tell the new hires that would come at the agency when I was talking about Moe, if you can be 1/10 the operations officer that Moe Berg was, you'll be doing very, very well. The reason being, he had all these natural gifts that he brought to the intelligence business that, quite frankly, you've got to be born with. Yes, you can cultivate the naturally acquired talents, but you just don't go out and become a spy. Moe was one of these things that was hardwired for the life, and he loved it. So, consequently, he did very well at it.
The leaders of the Manhattan Project wanted the Allies to abduct Werner Heisenberg. Berg was ordered to shoot Heisenberg on the spot if he thought Heisenberg was close to developing the atomic bomb.
Moe's target, and I don't mean that in terms of a pistol, but in operational speak, your target is who you're focused on or the topic. In this case, it was Germany's development of the Wunderwaffen, the atomic bomb. Now, in the framework of a historical context, you have to remember that that was going on right here in the United States, although very, very, very few people knew about it. The Manhattan Project. It was one of those things that was the best kept secret, and they actually kept the secret, something that doesn't really happen all that much in today's world. But in the case of what was going on with General Groves and company, we knew we were trying to develop this bomb. The problem was we didn't know where Germany stood in the development of its own kind of nuclear weapon. You have to think, and this was part of this psychology back when we were trying to piece this together in the context of Germany and will it or won't it, that's where you had, the brain trust of nuclear physicists. That's where you had things like lots of deposits of heavy water. All the stuff you need to make an atomic bomb, Germany pretty much had. So while Leslie Groves is working, our octogenarian scientist, double shift, triple shift, trying to turn a bomb out before the Germans do, we weren't necessarily sure the Germans were doing it. I mean, good money says, yeah, they're probably doing it, but we didn't really know for sure. So who today, and that's the OSS, and even Franklin Roosevelt, picked to determine this? That would be one Moe Berg, baseball player. Now, the reason Moe got selected was because of what we've been referring to, his superior intellect. Some say he spoke 8 languages. Some say he spoke 12. I tend to think that he was one of these things like playing piano by ear. You don't necessarily know how to read music, but you can pick up the lingo, the language, the street lingo, which is incredibly important for operatives, to be able to function in that particular environment at that particular time. On top of that, he had been drilled in nuclear physics by Albert Einstein. So when it came to the business of his scientific knowledge, his ability with language, and the fact that he had the natural inclinations of a spy, he was the one that Franklin Roosevelt and Leslie Groves and William Donovan selected for this rather bizarre mission of taking out Werner Heisenberg if it was proven, and that was Moe's job, that the man had some integral part with Germany's bomb development.
On December 14, 1944, Berg attended a physics lecture in Zurich, Switzerland. Switzerland, being neutral in World War II, was the most logical place to meet Germans.
German intellectuals loved Switzerland because it was a place to enjoy the finer things in life during the war.
Berg sat with 20 professors and graduate students to hear Heisenberg give a lecture on S-matrix theory.
Heisenberg was allowed outside of Germany to give a talk in Zurich, Switzerland, a scientific talk, a benign scientific talk. It was one of these things where he was going to appear in front of maybe 20, 30 people and talk about some scientific principle. Moe was told about it through his contacts. He said, Moe, if you want to see and get a good gander at Heisenberg, here's your opportunity. Oddly enough, and this is how well he pulled off the spy thing, he dressed up as a student. He went as a student. That was his undercover role, his persona, which at this point, he's 40-plus years old. Now, yeah, the room was dimly lit, but still, you have to be able to carry it off. He did. Now, what he did was train himself right on Heisenberg, listen to Heisenberg, and because Moe had had the training, enough of it anyway, in nuclear fission, atom splitting, and all this stuff from the likes of Einstein and company, plus the fact that he spoke German, Moe did, he understood the flow of the conversation, of the discussion. So he's sitting there listening to the talk, but not only is he training his interest on Heisenberg, the presenter, but he's taking in the reaction of the people around him, the other students, the other attendees. In other words, if Heisenberg started speaking of something really, really out there, everybody would perk up in their seats. But yeah, it was just basically a droll scientific discussion, and they're listening and they're taking notes, which is exactly what Moe is doing. He's taking notes on what Heisenberg is saying, and he's watching what the other participants are doing. There was nothing that Heisenberg said in his prepared remarks or the reaction of the audience to those remarks that even suggested that something was going on in Germany besides this rather bland discussion that Heisenberg was presenting. So Moe thought, that's interesting. There's nothing there that tells me there's anything going on under the surface. A lot of what intelligence folks do, too, is inference. What do you draw from that statement? What do you draw from that particular presentation? This was just a pretty benign scientific presentation.
To Berg, Heisenberg looked small at 5'6" and 110 pounds.
Moe got himself invited through his contacts to an informal little get-together that was being hosted in Heisenberg's honor there in Zurich. Now, mind you, this is Zurich. It's not Nazi Germany. He's come out of Germany just for this little tete-a-tete that he's having with these scientific folks, some of whom are his friends. At any rate, through his contacts, Moe gets himself invited to that. I say, if you want to be a very good spy, learn how to work the room at a diplomatic reception, because that's where a lot of it goes down. That's exactly what he did at this get-together. It was a casual little coffee and cake type thing where meet Heisenberg, talk science, have a good time. Moe got himself invited to it, and that's exactly what he did. Not only did he buttonhole Heisenberg during the conversation, during the dinner talk itself, he followed the man outside and walked down the street in Zurich underneath the lights, and it sounds very, very spooky and spy-like, and started asking him odd questions. And Heisenberg was responding. Why? He seemed innocent enough. He wasn't really thinking that he was going to be grilled and drilled by an American operative, which is exactly what was going on. But Moe knew how to, I shudder to use the word, manipulate things enough that he pulled it off. And to be a good spy, you have to be a manipulator.
It was a perfect opportunity for Berg to murder Heisenberg. Berg chose to let Heisenberg live another day, especially when he heard Heisenberg say at dinner that the war was lost for Germany.
Berg's intuition was correct. The Germans were not even close to building an atomic bomb.
On May 15, 1945, World War II in Europe ended.
For most people, World War II disrupted their lives. For Moe Berg, the end of World War II disrupted his life. He loved being a spy.
After the break, the conclusion. But first, let's listen to another portion of Moe Berg the Song by Chuck Brodsky.
Moe Berg and the Babe, they went over to Japan with a team of touring all-stars giving clinics for the fans. This was back in the 30s, as the world prepared for war. Moe took a lot of pictures, nobody knew what for.
Don't forget about Baseball PhD in the winter. We've got great podcasts for you. Next week, we'll be focusing on one of the greatest baseball sportscasters of all time, Vin Scully. The season never ends on Baseball PhD. The conclusion.
After the war, Berg still encouraged people to think he was a spy.
He traveled through life without a calendar.
Linda McCarthy.
And Moe, one of the reasons why I've been drawn to the character, not only is he so complex and so gifted, he kind of followed his own beat of his own drum. The business of playing baseball, his family did not appreciate that because they were immigrants, and the American success story to them did not involve organized sports. It involved the professions. Dr. Sam was a medical doctor, Moe was the lawyer, and Ethel was the teacher. Now, those were very primo occupations for an immigrant family. In the case of my Irish upbringing, if you got to be a cop in Boston, that was considered excellent. But in the case of Moe and Company, it was a business of the actual professions. Now, once he got his law degree and his Princeton education, the fact that he actually, I won't say threw it all away, but actually moved in another direction, 180 degrees away from it, and joined an organized professional team, that upset his father tremendously.
Berg moved in with his brother, Dr. Sam, after the war at Dr. Sam's home in Newark. Berg declined a coaching position with the White Sox. Ralph Berger.
He would sit in the right field stands at the Mets games by himself in a black suit, carrying a black Neville Chamberlain-type umbrella. And he didn't want anyone to bother him. He just wanted to watch the ball game.
For Berg, today's destination was tomorrow's departure.
He was a close friend of Anita Loos, the writer, and his sister was angry because he never took her to meet Anita Loos, and yet when some distant relative came to visit him when he was staying at Rose's place, he said, "I'll take you to see Anita Loos," and so she was really livid. The whole family seemed to be in direct conflict with each other.
Berg often visited Princeton and Albert Einstein. Einstein taught Berg physics. Berg tried to teach Einstein baseball. Berg paid his way with stories and charm.
He was really wanted, after one thing that was good for him after the war was over, intellectual people like Anita Loos and, et cetera, they wanted him to be around to listen to what knowledge he had.
Berg punctuated his monologues with bathing. Whenever possible, Berg took 3 baths each day. Farley and Mark, even with all of these idiosyncrasies, Moe Berg lived an original life and did what he loved and loved what he did. A catcher who was a spy, he was one of the best from the greatest generation.
Thank you for listening to Baseball PhD.
Let's close with the remainder of Moe Berg, the song by Chuck Brodsky.
Moe Berg, the secret agent, never even told his mom of his mission to determine if the Germans had the bomb. He learned to speak good physics without hardly a lisp. He infiltrated lectures with a German scientist. Moe Berg, the walking riddles, put his fingers to his lips. If you recognized him on the street, he'd nod and whisper, shh. Kept a lot of secrets no one will ever know. He knew a lot of people, but nobody ever knew Moe. Moe Berg, the beloved, he had the gift of gab. The moocher, the celebrity, he never paid the tab. He could get in at the ballpark on his lifetime player's pass. Neat up in the press box, someone always filled his glass. Moe Berg, son of an immigrant, brought his father shame. All that education, then to play a child's game. Moe made it to the majors, but his dad would never go see him. Moe's baseball cards on display at the CIA Museum. Long after he'd retired, there was still Moe Berg the myth. He rode into the sunset, sadly hanging on to it. Appearing on a game show as the mystery guest. Some say disappearing might be what Moe Berg did best.